Sarah was dazed for a second, before quickly snapping back to reality. Ahead of her was the military base auditorium, buzzing with the lively atmosphere of a commendation banquet. Voices chattered loudly, and elegant ceremonial music drifted through the air. It was the fall of 1984. She had come back. She had returned to the very banquet that would completely rewrite her marriage, crush her dignity, and turn every step of her past life's future into pure misery. Today was the commendation banquet for James's individual third-class merit. All the officers of the regiment and their families were in attendance. It was the proudest, most honorable highlight of his entire military career. Yet, it was also today that he would do something so absurd it would spread through the entire family compound, subjecting her to everyone's gossip and pointed fingers for years. He hadn't brought her, his actual wife, to the event. Instead, he had brought his childhood sweetheart, Clara. Hey guys, in relationships, overcompromising can make you lose yourself. Let's see how Sarah, a once submissive wife, calmly took her power back. In her previous life, it wasn't until halfway through the banquet, amidst the whispering mockery of bystanders, that she had stumbled wretchedly into the hall. There, she had seen it with her own eyes. James, standing tall and straight, wearing a red flower on his shoulder, with the gentle-eyed Clara standing right by his side. That sight had pierced her so deeply that she broke down on the spot. Her tears had fallen out of control, and her public questioning and physical struggling had caused a massive scene that everyone came to know about. In the end, she had earned a reputation for being narrow-minded, insanely jealous, unhinged, and ignorant of the bigger picture. James had lost all face because of her outburst and had grown to despise her utterly. Clara, on the other hand, had looked pitiful, acting weak and accommodating, which won her the sympathy of everyone present. Everyone had urged Sarah to realize that her husband's career was just taking off, telling her that she needed to be sensible, forgiving, and mindful of the greater good. No one bothered to ask her, when a husband brings another woman to pose as his family member at a military merit banquet, who is the one truly crossing the line? She had swallowed her pride, compromised, and humbly tried to save her marriage, wasting years of her youth. Ultimately, all it brought her was a body riddled with illness, a heart covered in scars, and a lonely, miserable death. Thankfully, heaven had eyes and granted her a second chance at life. This time, as she stood by the side door of the auditorium, her footing was steady. There was not a trace of the panic from her previous life. She was dressed in a clean, simple, navy blue floral shirt and black trousers, the most ordinary outfit for a military wife in the 1980s. Her hair was neatly pinned back, making her look gentle and quiet. On the surface, she looked no different from the meek and accommodating woman she had always been. But only she knew the truth. All the love, subservience, and tolerance in her eyes had completely and utterly died. The crowd surged forward, and applause erupted in waves. She raised her eyes, her gaze cutting precisely through the sea of bobbing heads to land on the tall, upright man on the stage. James, 27 years old, was a regimental commander. He was young and promising, with a resolute, cold, and handsome face. His back was perfectly straight, and his military uniform accentuated his commanding presence and composed demeanor. He had always been like this, carrying an air of absolute indifference to favor or disgrace. After years of weathering the storms of military life, almost nothing could make him lose his composure in the slightest. At this moment, having just accepted his merit certificate, he held the red-covered booklet in his fingertips. His expression was detached, his features radiating the effortless grace and nobility of a man in a high position. Standing right next to him, practically pressed against his side, was a woman with smiling eyes and a delicate figure. Dressed in a brand-new, light-colored dress and wearing exquisite makeup, she stood out sharply amidst the crowd of simply dressed military wives. It was Clara. She turned slightly, looking up at James with undisguised admiration and smugness in her eyes. A perfectly measured, gentle smile hung on her lips, and her intimate posture made her look every bit the triumphant military wife. Many of the officers' family members around them were quietly observing the pair and whispering, "This must be Commander James's wife, right? She looks so gentle and refined. No wonder the commander has always been so attentive to her. She really does carry a different aura. A talented man and a beautiful woman, they're a perfect match." In her previous life, these compliments would have pierced through Sarah like needles, but hearing them now, her heart felt no ripples of emotion. She simply stared quietly at the two people on stage. Her gaze was mild, devoid of joy or sorrow. There was no anger, no sense of injustice, and certainly not a single shred of hysteria. Just then, James seemed to unconsciously scan the crowd, his peripheral vision sweeping over the room. The next second, their eyes met, and the air suddenly fell dead silent. Sarah clearly saw James's entire body stiffen violently. The fingers that had been steadily holding the merit certificate tightened so sharply that his knuckles turned white. The perpetual, unchanging calm and indifference on his face shattered instantly. Those eyes, usually deep, sharp, and unfazed by anything, were suddenly flooded with shock and panic, along with a trace of undisguised helplessness. He was completely stunned. In his mind, she was supposed to be waiting dutifully at home. She shouldn't have appeared at the commendation banquet at all. Even if she did come, given her usual meek, timid, and accommodating nature, seeing this scene would surely make her eyes turn red. She would swallow her grievances, either lowering her head to cry or averting her gaze in a panic. He had never seen her like this. Standing quietly in the crowd, neither too far nor too close, she was cold and detached. There was no crying, no making a scene, no sense of grievance, not even the slightest fluctuation of emotion. Those eyes that were once filled with admiration and subservience, constantly following his every move, were now empty, distant, and indifferent. It was as if she were looking at two completely unrelated strangers. This entirely unfamiliar look instantly crushed all his certainty. As a dignified regimental commander who had been through countless drills and missions, a man who wouldn't bat an eye even in the face of life and death, he was now panicking entirely under her gaze. His body subconsciously leaned forward, his steps nearly stumbling. He could no longer maintain the calm, stern look on his face. Standing by his side, Clara noticed his loss of composure immediately. A shadow flashed across Clara's eyes, but she quickly masked it with a weak and innocent look. Gently raising her hand, she touched James's arm with apparent thoughtfulness, her voice soft and sweet. "James, what's wrong? Are you just too tired?" Her movements were intimate and natural, carrying a deliberate declaration of sovereignty. In her past life, seeing this would have made Sarah lose control completely. But now, she merely withdrew her gaze indifferently. Her expression remained calm as she turned slightly, preparing to walk away from the stage and avoid the clamor. Her composed indifference only made James's panic look even more glaring. There were quite a few acquaintances around. Celia, a fellow military wife from the neighboring family compound, was standing not too far away. Seeing the scene on stage, and then noticing Sarah's calm profile, Celia immediately furrowed her brows, her face full of indignation. But she was afraid that making a public scene would put Sarah at a disadvantage, so she could only hold her frustration in forcefully. James's comrade in arms, Ryan, was also standing off to the side. Taking in this bizarre situation, a flash of understanding and helplessness instantly crossed his eyes. Who in the entire military compound didn't know that Sarah treated James as her whole world, serving him with all her heart and being endlessly submissive? But today, it was as if the sun had risen in the west. The usually devoted wife was indifferent and distant, while the typically arrogant husband was flustered and losing his composure. James's Adam's apple bobbed violently. His heart seized inexplicably, and an unprecedented wave of panic swept through his entire body. He could no longer care about the glory on stage or the gazes of those around him. His eyes were deadlocked on her back, his mind entirely unsettled. Clara was still feigning weakness, softly comforting him. "Everyone is congratulating you. Don't space out. Today's your big day." As she spoke, she deliberately lowered her head slightly, putting on a meek and sensible appearance to pull everyone's attention back to herself and James. But James couldn't hear a single word. All his thoughts were completely stuck on that brief moment of eye contact just now. Her gaze had been too cold, too detached, and too unfamiliar. That kind of total withdrawal and apathetic indifference made him inexplicably panicked, as if something he had always held firmly in his grasp was quietly slipping away forever. Suppressing the panic in his heart, he forced his expression to steady and gave a perfunctory nod to Clara beside him, but his gaze remained glued to Sarah, refusing to shift away even an inch. Sarah could clearly feel that anxious, panicked gaze, yet she remained entirely unmoved. In her previous life, she had compromised herself completely and endured every grievance just for a single tender look from him, only to end up covered in scars. In this life, her heart would never flutter for him again. The ceremonial music of the commendation banquet continued to play, and the applause kept ringing out, but James's shining moment had been completely shattered by his internal panic. He stood on the high stage, bathed in glory, the center of attention, and basking in infinite prestige, yet he had lost the one wife whose eyes used to be full of him, the one who had been willing to sacrifice everything for him. And all of this had unraveled from just a single moment of meeting her eyes. Sarah's movements as she turned around were very slow and relaxed, lacking the slightest embarrassment of someone fleeing in panic. Behind her, from the high stage, that anxious gaze clung to her spine like a persistent shadow. She didn't need to look back to imagine what James looked like at this moment. His usually composed and restrained military demeanor had been completely thrown into disarray by her emotionless turn. In this exact moment in her past life, she had covered her mouth and cried bitterly, fleeing wretchedly. She had let everyone witness her humiliation, which also allowed Clara to logically accept everyone's comfort and solidify her identity as the innocent victim. But today, Sarah's dignity would never be trampled on by anyone again. She walked slowly to the family seating area at the back of the auditorium and found an empty seat in a corner, far away from the center of the stage and the crowd of people who kept sizing her up and whispering. The surrounding discussions drifted clearly into her ears, far more direct and grating than the whispers from before. That was Commander James's wife just now, right? I noticed her expression was way too detached. Something doesn't look right. Who would feel good in her shoes? It's her own man's big day for receiving a merit, and instead of bringing her, he brought another woman. Anyone would feel suffocated by that. But then again, the commander's career is important. Don't all of us military wives have to keep the bigger picture in mind? If she really made a scene, the one who suffers will still be the wife herself. These words carried sympathy and advice, but mostly they reflected the deep-rooted, inherent mindset of the 1980s military wives circle. A man's career came first, and a woman had to be enduring and accommodating. In the past, Sarah would have gripped the hem of her shirt tightly, her hands and feet icy cold, her heart full of grievances but too afraid to argue back. She would have been terrified that her emotions might hinder James's future, afraid of being criticized for being insensible. But now, her fingertips were relaxed, her back straight. She sat quietly, her expression indifferent, entirely unmoved by the gossip of others. Not far away, Celia walked quickly to Sarah's side. Lowering her voice, which was filled with indignation, she spoke with urgency and heartache. "Sarah, why did you come? Did you already know about this? What James is doing is just plain wrong. It's completely absurd." Celia was the most clear-headed person in the family compound. She had a straightforward personality and couldn't stand any underhanded, dirty tricks. In Sarah's previous life, Celia had been the only one who genuinely stood up for her, only to be held back by Sarah's own cowardice at the time. Sarah turned her head to look at her and gently shook her head, her voice steady and devoid of emotion. "It's fine, Celia. It's just a banquet. It's not worth getting worked up over." Sarah's calmness completely shocked Celia. She froze in place, staring blankly at her. A woman whose eyes used to turn red at the slightest grievance was actually this composed when faced with such a massive humiliation. Not worth it? Celia gritted her teeth in anxiety. "This is no small matter. All the regiment's leaders and their families are here, and he brings another woman right through the front door. This is a slap in your face, trampling on your dignity. How can you still be so calm?" Sarah curved her lips slightly into a cold smile. She didn't explain, and there was no need to explain. What others saw as a monumental humiliation was, to the reborn Sarah, merely the beginning of the myriad sufferings from her past life. Compared to the torment, loneliness, and tragic death she had endured then, this little bit of public embarrassment was truly insignificant. If you endure it once, you have to endure it every time. If you take one step back, you will eventually have nowhere left to go. She had already been a fool for an entire lifetime. She would absolutely not repeat the same mistakes. The commendation proceedings on the stage were still ongoing. As the host's impassioned words fell, applause rang out once again. Taking advantage of this enthusiastic atmosphere, Clara naturally turned slightly, raised her hand, and gently brushed away a non-existent wrinkle on James's shoulder. Her movements were tender and affectionate, perfectly capturing the posture of a meticulously considerate woman. She lifted her eyes, her gaze sweeping fleetingly toward where Sarah was sitting, hiding a trace of subtle provocation and smugness. She was certain that Sarah would be jealous, angry, and ultimately break down from holding it in. After all, this was a moment she had planned for a long time. By showing up as his childhood sweetheart at the highlight of James's commendation, she was blurring the lines of family, making everyone implicitly accept her special status, and slowly eating away at Sarah's position bit by bit. After completing this little gesture, Clara spoke softly, her volume just loud enough for the people nearby to hear clearly. "James, you've worked so hard today. All these years of painstaking effort have finally paid off. I'm truly happy for you." These words seemed like ordinary congratulations, but they actually hid a deeper meaning. Longtime companionship, sharing hardships, every single word implied that she was the one who had weathered the storms with James, while Sarah was just an irrelevant outsider. The gazes of those around them instantly became subtle. Standing to the side, Ryan frowned imperceptibly. He took a look at Clara, who was feigning deep affection, and then looked toward Sarah, who remained calmly seated the entire time. In his heart, he already understood perfectly. From beginning to end, today's event was nothing but Clara deliberately creating a spectacle. James's state at this moment was extremely poor. His mind was in turmoil, completely lacking his usual sharpness and composure. Having Clara pressed up against him as she spoke, he not only lacked his former calmness, but instead, his entire body stiffened. His eyes uncontrollably kept drifting toward Sarah. He was simply too panicked. He was used to her accommodation, used to her devotion, and used to her always revolving around him, her emotions constantly dictated by his. But today, she didn't cry or make a fuss, and she showed no resentment or anger. She felt that even taking one extra look at him was superfluous. This complete detachment terrified and unsettled him, far more than any hysterical argument ever could. Clara keenly noticed his absent-mindedness. A trace of displeasure flashed in her eyes, but she immediately assumed a weak and sensible appearance. She asked softly, "James, are you not feeling well? Why do you keep zoning out? How about we go down and rest first? Don't tire yourself out." As she spoke, she reached out, wanting to link her arm through James's. But right at the moment her fingertips were about to touch his sleeve, James subconsciously turned sideways and dodged it. The movement was abrupt and undisguised. Clara's hand froze in midair, the gentle smile on her face instantly cracking to reveal her awkwardness and embarrassment. Everyone in the audience watching this scene up close had subtle expressions. James ignored her dismay. His gaze was deadlocked on Sarah offstage. His thin lips were pressed tightly together, his jawline pulled taut. He didn't know why she had changed, didn't know why she suddenly didn't care, and even less did he know that her heart, which he had recklessly drained, neglected, and ignored, had long since gone completely cold. Sarah took in all of his loss of composure, his panic, and his involuntary reactions. Her heart felt no ripples. She even found it ridiculous. In her past life, he had been cold and distant to her, while accommodating Clara in every possible way. She had thought it was because she wasn't good enough, that she wasn't gentle enough, so she desperately tried to please him, changing herself, humbly accommodating him, and making compromises. It turned out that wasn't the case. It was simply that he had never taken her to heart. Once she was no longer submissive, no longer devoted, and no longer revolving around him, all his certainty and control instantly collapsed. Clara forcibly suppressed the anger and embarrassment in her heart, swapping back to an aggrieved and delicate expression. With a perfectly measured choke in her voice, she said, "Was I too forward? James, I'm just worried about you. If I bothered you, I apologize." In Sarah's past life, this appearance of being wronged, yet sensibly yielding, would have definitely drawn everyone's pity and sparked James's guilt, making him turn to comfort Clara while neglecting Sarah. But this time, James remained entirely unmoved. He couldn't even muster a perfunctory gesture of comfort. His heart and eyes were completely filled with Sarah's cold, indifferent gaze. Offstage, Celia watched with immense satisfaction. She leaned quietly close to Sarah's ear and whispered, "See that? He doesn't even want the one throwing herself at him. This Clara putting on an act is just disgusting to watch." Sarah nodded lightly and murmured faintly, "Fake can never become real." Her voice wasn't loud, yet it was crystal clear. It didn't name any names, but it exposed all the underlying deceit. Clara wasn't far away, and happened to hear this sentence clearly. Her face instantly turned pale, calculation and panic flashing across her eyes. She finally realized that the Sarah of today and the cowardly, easily bullied Sarah of the past who would only silently endure was completely different. The commendation ceremony finally ended, and the ceremonial music stopped playing. The crowd began to disperse and move around, greeting and congratulating each other. Almost immediately, ignoring the crowd of people surrounding him with congratulations, James stepped directly off the stage. His steps were hurried, carrying a trace of unconcealable panic as he walked straight in Sarah's direction. The tall, upright man in uniform strode through the noisy crowd, ignoring the gazes of everyone around him. His eyes were fixed solely on Sarah in the corner. This scene left everyone in the hall dumbfounded. No one had expected that Commander James, who had just received a military merit and was in the limelight, would drop all his social obligations to seek out his wife at the very first opportunity. Clara's face darkened completely. She clenched her palms tightly, her nails digging into her flesh, as she forced herself to maintain a frail appearance and quickly followed behind him. Sarah sat in her original seat, neither anxious nor impatient, quietly watching him walk toward her. She didn't stand up to welcome him, showed no signs of nervousness, and didn't have the slightest hint of her usual gentle smile. James stopped about a meter away from her, looking down at her. Complex emotions surged in his deep eyes: panic, guilt, helplessness, and a trace of unbelievable disparity. His Adam's apple bobbed. Suppressing his erratic breathing, he spoke to her, for the first time with a somewhat cautious tone. Sarah, when did you get here? It was a very plain question, yet it couldn't hide the panic in his heart. Sarah raised her eyes and looked calmly and directly at him. Her tone was distant yet polite, faultless in every way. I arrived right when the ceremony started. Just a simple sentence. No questioning, no resentment, open and calm. But it was exactly this calmness that made James's heart sink completely. What he feared most was her saying nothing at all. With a stiff expression, he tried to explain, his tone carrying a rare clumsiness. It's not what you think. Clara just happened to be visiting and stopped by to watch the ceremony. It was the same utterly perfunctory excuse again. In her previous life, she had believed it every time, compromised every time, and tormented herself internally every time. Sarah raised her eyebrows slightly. Her tone was light and perfectly measured. One couldn't find a single flaw in it. Yes, I know. It's completely normal for the commander's old friend to come and observe the ceremony. She was too understanding, too magnanimous, too indifferent. This extraordinary clarity completely shattered any illusions James might have harbored. He had anticipated her getting angry, feeling wronged, giving him the cold shoulder, or interrogating him. The only thing he hadn't anticipated was her not caring at all. Clara, who had followed closely behind, immediately chimed in. Her eyes were slightly red, making her look exceptionally pitiful. Sarah, it's all my fault for being presumptuous. I came over without letting you know beforehand, and caused James to be misunderstood. Please don't blame him. If you want to blame anyone, blame me. It was a classic tactic of retreating in order to advance. By taking all the blame upon herself, she was actually clearing James's name, showcasing her own sensibleness, and by contrast, making Sarah appear petty and jealous. In her past life, Sarah had been forced into retreating step by this very rhetoric, completely unable to defend herself. But today, Sarah simply looked at her indifferently. Her tone was peaceful, yet every word was razor sharp. Miss Clara, you're overstating things. The commander has earned a merit. It is a celebration for everyone. It's perfectly reasonable for a guest to observe the ceremony. How is that presumptuous? It's just that the seats in the family area are limited. A non-family member occupying a seat here might violate military base rules and invite gossip, that's all. Every word she spoke was about the rules, and every sentence stood on reason. There was no arguing, no making a scene, yet she directly exposed the fact that Clara had overstepped her bounds by taking a seat under false pretenses. Clara's face instantly turned ghastly pale, and she was left speechless. All her fragile disguise was instantly pierced through. She stood frozen on the spot, completely at a loss for what to do. Hearing this, James's heart jolted violently. Looking down at the calm and composed Sarah, the panic in his heart grew even more intense. Her clarity, rationality, and sense of propriety, her distance, indifference, and sobriety, every single change was fiercely tearing at his mind. In this moment, he understood with absolute clarity that something had fundamentally changed. The Sarah, whose heart and eyes were once entirely filled with him, truly didn't want him anymore. Silenced by Sarah bringing up military rules, Clara tightly twisted the hem of her dress with the hands resting by her sides. Her eyes reddened perfectly, making her look like she had suffered a massive grievance but didn't dare to argue. The passing officers and family members who knew them unconsciously slowed their steps, their gazes darting back and forth between the three of them. Whispered discussions began to slowly surface again. James turned his head, glancing at the tearful Clara beside him, and then turned back to look at Sarah, who was sitting upright and composed, her expression unreadable. The anxiety in his chest, mixed with a trace of panic that even he couldn't quite explain, surged up. In the past, whenever Clara showed even the slightest hint of feeling wronged, Sarah would subconsciously yield, afraid that her words had been too harsh and hurt someone. But today, Sarah showed no intention of retreating an inch. Every word she spoke was strictly in accordance with military base regulations, not leaving the slightest shred of face for them. He took a half step forward, deliberately blocking the line of sight between Sarah and Clara. Lowering his voice, his tone carried his usual firmness, yet it hid an imperceptible probe. Sarah, Clara just traveled a long way to congratulate me. She didn't mean to overstep. You don't have to speak so harshly. If others see this, they might mistakenly think our marriage is on the rocks. These were the exact same words he had used to suppress her in her past life. He always put appearances and the opinions of others first, never once considering the very real embarrassment she was subjected to. Sarah slowly stood up to meet his gaze levelly. The oppressive feeling brought by their height difference didn't make her flinch in the slightest. Her tone was steady, her logic clear. One couldn't hear a trace of anger in it, yet every word hit the nail on the head. The foundation of a harmonious marriage is mutual respect, not blind concealment. Today is a commendation banquet. The seats in the family area are exclusively for registered military families. The regimental headquarters issued a specific notice beforehand, stating that visiting relatives and friends must wait in the visitor area and cannot occupy seats in the family area on the stage. I am simply stating the facts according to the rules. How is that harsh? If I turned a blind eye today, and other families followed suit later, the regiment's rules and regulations would become mere decorations. When that time comes, you'll be the one in a difficult position. There was not a single word of personal accusation in this speech. From beginning to end, she stood on the ground of military base management and his reputation. One couldn't find a single fault to accuse her of being selfish or jealous. James was silenced. The comforting words he had prepared were completely blocked in his throat, and he actually couldn't find a single angle to refute her. Having led troops for years, he valued rules and regulations the most. Now that she laid out the regimental headquarters notice right on the table, he had no way to argue. Seeing that James was left speechless by Sarah, the sense of crisis in Clara's heart grew heavier. She gently tugged at the cuff of James's sleeve. Her voice was weak and carried a hint of a sob. James, it's all my fault for not understanding the rules and regulations of the military base. I've caused trouble for you and Sarah. I'll go wait in the visitor area now so I'm not an eyesore to everyone. As she spoke, she made a show of turning around, but her footsteps dragged, clearly waiting for James to speak up and ask her to stay. In her past life, James would definitely have grabbed her out of heartache, then turned to scold Sarah for not knowing how to be accommodating. But at this moment, his mind was completely fixated on Sarah's cold expression, and he completely missed Clara's little act. He just waved his hand casually. All right, you go wait on the side first. I'll come over after I say a few words to Sarah. It was just a simple sentence, completely devoid of any pity or comfort. Clara's hand, which had been tugging at his sleeve, froze in midair. The fragile smile on her face completely fell apart, and a layer of resentment quickly flashed across her eyes. Constrained by the presence of the crowd, she could only forcefully suppress it. Bowing slightly, she slowly walked toward the visitor waiting area in the corner of the auditorium. As she left, she didn't forget to look back and shoot Sarah a glare, her eyes full of unwillingness. Seeing Clara being sent away, the surrounding onlookers who were watching the drama unfold had already made their judgments. They dispersed in twos and threes. No one stepped forward to plead on Clara's behalf. Celia stood not far away and secretly gave Sarah a thumbs up, a satisfied smile hiding at the corners of her mouth. Only Sarah and James were left in the area. The noisy voices were now separated by a layer of distance, making the space between them seem exceptionally quiet by contrast. James took a step closer. The cold, hard aura of a soldier surrounding him softened considerably, revealing a conciliatory posture that he rarely showed in the past. Softening his tone, he tried to recapture the warmth of their previous interactions. What happened on stage just now was my lack of consideration. I didn't discuss it with you beforehand and made you uncomfortable. I apologize. After we go home, I will slowly explain the whole situation to you. In the past, Sarah always fell for this tactic of him bowing his head and showing weakness. As long as he softened his tone even slightly, she would take the initiative to let go of all her grievances and turn around to comfort him, telling him not to feel troubled. But now, she knew clearly that his so-called explanation was nothing more than weaving together one sugar-coated excuse after another, downplaying his own faults and shifting all the pressure onto her. Sarah turned slightly, putting a little distance between them. Her expression was distant but polite. There's no need for a special explanation. Business is business, and private matters are private matters. At a banquet, we shouldn't let personal disputes delay others from offering their congratulations. You just earned a military merit, and many leaders and colleagues are still waiting to greet you. Don't hold up important matters because of me. She proactively gave him an out, pushing him to go deal with his social obligations. It seemed sensible and considerate, but in reality, she was drawing a clear boundary, unwilling to get entangled with him privately anymore. Hearing these words, James's chest suddenly felt empty. That panic of being unable to grasp something magnified once again. He had imagined her crying, making a scene, giving him the cold shoulder, or locking the door and refusing to speak. The only thing he hadn't imagined was that she would so generously push him away, as if his joy, anger, sorrow, happiness, and military glory could no longer stir her emotions in the slightest. Sarah. His brows furrowed tightly, and a rare look of helplessness appeared in his eyes. You know perfectly well that I don't care about the socializing. What I care about is what you're thinking. I don't have any particular thoughts. Sarah lowered her eyes, sweeping her gaze over the faded cloth bracelet on her wrist. Her tone was flat. Abiding by the military base rules, focusing on your future, and living a dutiful life, those are the things I should be thinking about. The rest of the irrelevant people and matters are not worth expending my energy on. Irrelevant. James repeated the word in a low voice, a hint of imperceptible tension added to his tone. Clara is not irrelevant to me. We've known each other since we were young. Knowing each other since youth is a sentiment of the past, but you are married now and have a legally registered wife. You must maintain proper boundaries. She interrupted him, not giving him the chance to reminisce about old times or play up an emotional atmosphere. Boundaries apply everywhere, whether inside the military base or outside of it. Her few words left him completely unable to defend himself. He knew his actions today had crossed the line. He had originally thought she would cling to their emotional bond and make a fuss about it, but instead, she only focused on boundaries and rules, elevating the scope of the conversation. In contrast, her approach made his behavior seem incredibly narrow-minded and selfish. Having just finished dealing with a wave of officers coming to offer congratulations, Ryan happened to walk over. Seeing the tense atmosphere between the two of them, he proactively stepped forward to smooth things over. James, quite a few battalion-level officers are still over there waiting to take a commemorative photo with you. If you don't go over soon, it might be considered rude. Sarah, today is a day of great celebration. Let's not get caught up in being angry over trivial matters. Ryan was an upright and fair person who wouldn't deliberately take anyone's side. His words were earnest and objective. James knew that what Ryan said was the truth. In the center of the auditorium, a group of leaders was waiting. As the main character receiving the commendation, lingering here for too long in a standoff with his wife would inevitably lead to gossip about him failing to separate public and private matters. However, looking at her profile, which remained cold and unflappable the entire time, he was 1,000 times unwilling to leave just like this. He was terrified that the moment he turned around, the last remaining thread of connection between them would completely sever. He hesitated for a moment before having no choice but to suppress the emotions surging in his heart. He said to her in a deep voice, "After the banquet ends, I'll go look for you at the family compound. We'll have a proper talk at home. Don't keep a cold face out here and invite people's gossip." She nodded slightly, neither agreeing nor refusing, giving no clear response at all. James took a long, deep look at her, before turning around and following Ryan toward the center of the auditorium. His steps were heavy, completely lacking the high-spirited vigor he had displayed when receiving his military merit certificate just moments ago. She stood alone in her spot, watching his receding figure. Not a single ripple stirred in her heart. In her previous life, she had always hoped he would take her feelings into account a bit more. Now, he was panicking and flustered, finally knowing how to care about her emotions, but she no longer needed this belated attention. The banquet lasted for a couple of hours. Throughout the entire event, she didn't take a single step to approach James. She found a table near the edge by herself and sat down, eating a few bites of pastries just to fill her stomach. Celia brought a plate of candy and sat down beside her, chatting with her in a low voice. She deliberately avoided mentioning the sight of James and Clara on stage, only talking about the needlework and daily chores in the family compound, clearly trying to help relieve Sarah's awkwardness. By the time the sky grew dark, the commendation banquet officially ended. The guests left one after another, and the tables and chairs in the auditorium were gradually cleared away by the orderlies. Clara, unable to wait for James to come looking for her on his own, had no choice but to take the initiative and walk over. She softly called out to James, who was just about to leave with the other officers. "James, the banquet is over. Can you take me to the bus station? I have to head back tonight." At this moment, James's mind was completely filled with going back to the family compound to talk to Sarah. He simply rejected Clara's request indifferently. "It's getting late. There are shuttle buses running outside the base gates. You can take one yourself. I still have family matters to deal with. It's not convenient for me to see you off." The color drained completely from Clara's face. Not daring to pester him in public, she could only tightly grip the straps of her bag and watch helplessly as James walked quickly out of the auditorium, heading straight in the direction of the family compound, without leaving even a fraction of a pause for her. Sarah and Celia walked back to the family compound together, strolling slowly along the way. The evening breeze brushed past, blowing away the noisy atmosphere of the auditorium. Celia voiced her injustices on Sarah's behalf the entire way, repeatedly muttering about how James had gone too far today. Sarah listened quietly, occasionally giving a hum of agreement, without saying a single word of resentment or complaint. When they reached the bottom of the apartment building in the family compound, she said goodbye to Celia, went upstairs alone, and pushed open the door to her home. The furnishings inside were exactly as she remembered them from countless times before: the wooden table, the old wooden trunk, the cleanly washed and neatly folded military uniforms. Every corner bore the marks of the endless effort she had poured into managing the household in the past. Before long, the sound of steady, hurried footsteps echoed in the hallway. The door was knocked lightly. Opening the door, James stood outside. He had taken off the red flower he wore for the commendation banquet and was now dressed in his regular uniform. A lingering exhaustion and anxiety marked his brow, and he carried 2 boxes of pastries that had just been distributed at the banquet. He stepped inside, placed the pastries on the table, and gently closed the door behind him, shutting out the sounds of people coming and going in the compound. Instantly, only the sound of their breathing remained in the room. "There's no one else here now. If you have anything on your mind, just tell me." He pulled out a wooden chair and sat opposite her, his eyes locked firmly on her face, trying to find even a trace of her past grievance and reluctance to let go. Sarah picked up a glass of cooled boiled water from the table and took a sip. She raised her eyes, looked at him calmly, and spoke first, immediately cutting to the core of the issue without beating around the bush. "Today, you brought Clara onto the stage to watch the ceremony as a family member. It wasn't a momentary oversight. You silently allowed her to cross the line. You know that in your heart, don't you?" James's fingertips tightened. He remained silent for a moment, not denying it, and muttered a low defense. "I just thought that since we're old friends who rarely see each other, I didn't want to disappoint her. I never thought things would escalate to such an awkward point. So, in order not to disappoint her, you could completely disregard my face and the military base regulations?" Sarah slowly put down the water glass. Her tone was flat but carried an unshakable clarity. "Your future, your reputation, your old friend's feelings, you took everything into consideration, except for the embarrassment I suffered in the midst of it all. In the past, I always believed that a husband and wife should be accommodating toward one another, so I backed down time and time again. But accommodation should always be a two-way street, not my one-sided, constant compromise." This was the first time she hadn't cried or made a scene, nor had she argued. With clear logic, she laid out the imbalance that had accumulated in her heart over the years. James stared blankly at her, the panic in his eyes growing heavier. He clearly realized that the Sarah before him would never again boundlessly accommodate all his selfishness. James sat on the wooden chair, his back perfectly straight, but the subconscious little movement of his fingers repeatedly rubbing together completely exposed the panic in his heart. Having held a high position for a long time, managing troops, handling various disputes, and dealing with leaders at all levels, he had always been decisive. Rarely was he ever this helpless. In the past, whenever there was a rift between them, as long as he softened his tone and said a few gentle words, she would proactively rein in her emotions and go right back to taking care of his daily life. She had never, like at this moment, so logically dissected the long-standing imbalance in their relationship. He remained silent for a long time, his Adam's apple bobbing heavily as he tried to find words to persuade her. His tone was mixed with a deliberately softer edge. "Sarah, over the years, I've been out carrying out missions, and the household chores, big and small, have all relied on you to manage. I know in my heart that I owe you a lot. I really didn't think things through today. From now on, I will definitely draw a clear line with Clara and never let you suffer the slightest grievance again. Can you please not keep dwelling on this matter?" These words sounded like a concession and an apology. In reality, he was still evading the core issue. He only promised to maintain boundaries in the future, but completely refused to face the fact that for a long time, it was his tacit approval that allowed Clara to continuously cross the line, pushing Sarah's boundaries time and time again. Sarah lowered her eyes to look at the washed-out, faded coarse tablecloth on the desk and spoke lightly, her voice steady and emotionless. "I'm not dwelling on a single banquet today. I'm just seeing clearly the boundaries of our relationship over all this time. The daily necessities at home, the seasonal clothes and bedding, everything is managed by me, alone. When you return late at night injured from training, it is always me waiting with hot food and hot water. But whenever it involves Clara, you can always easily cast aside my feelings and prioritize her mood." James's brows twisted tightly together, a trace of imperceptible irritation floating in his eyes. This irritation wasn't directed at Clara, but stemmed from his powerlessness in being unable to control Sarah. "She and I just knew each other when we were young. There are absolutely no foolish intentions between us. Why do you always have to assume the worst? The most important thing between a husband and wife should be trust. Trust is earned mutually, not a one-sided demand for me to hand over accommodation out of thin air." She raised her eyes and looked directly at him, with not a trace of her past softness and compliance. "If you knew how to maintain boundaries, you wouldn't have brought her to the family seating area at the commendation banquet. If you cared about my feelings, you would have at least given me a heads up beforehand. You do whatever you please, and inform me afterward, and now you demand trust from me instead. Isn't that a bit unfair?" Every word landed heavily. There was no arguing or shouting, yet it pressed down on James so hard he couldn't catch his breath. He was used to her submission and compromise. He never thought that one day she would logically and clearly refute all his arguments, every sentence piercing right into his selfishness. He was momentarily at a loss for words, sitting quietly in his spot. Only the ticking sound of the old wall clock remained in the room. A moment later, he relaxed his tense brows and assumed a slightly earnest appearance, trying to move her with past warmth. "We've been married for 3 years. I remember in my heart how much you've sacrificed for this family. From now on, I will interact less with Clara and discuss everything with you in advance. Can you please not treat me so coldly?" In the past, hearing him bring up their years of marriage and count her sacrifices, her heart would have ached, and she would have immediately softened and forgiven him. But reborn into this life, she understood clearly that such empty words could never be trusted. He had promised countless times in the past to keep his distance, only to turn around and continue indulging Clara as she pressed closer step by step. She gently shook her head, her tone peaceful, but her stance firm. "You don't have to deliberately change your way of doing things for me. Forced interaction is torture for both of us. From now on, I will still manage the household chores, and I will take care of your daily life as usual. It's just that in the future, you don't need to report your private interactions to me anymore, and I won't ask about them again." These words were tantamount to taking the initiative to distance herself and draw a clear emotional boundary. James abruptly raised his eyes, immense shock surging in them. His body subconsciously leaned forward a bit, and his voice unconsciously rose. "What do you mean by that? Are you planning to live in separate rooms from me? We will remain husband and wife in name, but there's no need to tie each other down emotionally anymore." She didn't avoid his gaze, calmly stating the plan in her heart. "In the past, I revolved around you in everything, and lost my own life. In the future, I want to set aside more time to do things for myself." She already had a plan. In 1984, the markets had just opened up. Many military wives were privately doing needlework, buying fabric, and reselling it to save up their own savings. In her past life, Sarah had wholeheartedly devoted herself to James, never once thinking of leaving herself a way out, only to end up with nothing in the end. In this life, she wanted to rely on her own 2 hands to build her savings, so she wouldn't have to live at the mercy of others' moods. After James heard this, the panic in his heart grew even more intense. He could accept her getting angry, giving him the cold shoulder, or even throwing brief temper tantrums, but he could not accept her taking the initiative to withdraw all her reliance and love. In his inherent mindset, she was born to revolve around him and their small family. He had never imagined that she would have the thought of leaving him behind to live for herself. "What are you going to do? The family compound has strict regulations, and you have to register every time you go out. What can you do all by yourself?" He subconsciously spoke up to stop her, his tone hiding a deep-rooted desire for control, as if her breaking away from the life trajectory he had planned was an incomprehensible mistake. Buying and selling fabric at the market, sewing ready-made clothes. Many military wives are doing it, and Celia even mentioned the connections to me a few days ago. It's completely compliant with the rules, and won't violate any military base regulations. She clearly laid out her plans, every step aligned with the current times and military base management rules, leaving him with no way to stop her. "Without relying on your salary, I can earn some pocket money myself. I won't have to hold out my hand and ask you for everything." James froze. He had never heard her bring up the idea of doing business. In the past, she had been cautious even about spending money, always putting him first, and had never thought about making money on her own. "I give you the full amount for household expenses every month. Why do you need to work so hard? Being exposed to the wind and sun is just too exhausting." He subconsciously tried to appease her with material things, attempting to dispel her thought of making an independent living. "The money is your salary. Spending it will always feel restricting. The money I earn myself, I can spend with peace of mind." She didn't waver in the slightest. "I won't neglect the household chores. I'll do the work during my free time at noon and in the evenings. It won't drag the family down at all, so you don't need to worry." Looking at her impenetrable and resolute appearance, James felt a wave of suffocation in his chest. He suddenly realized that he seemed to have never truly understood the wife beside him. Beneath her previously meek and soft exterior lay such a decisive and resilient nature. It was just that the former her had been unwilling to show even a fraction of it. The two silently confronted each other for a long time. Seeing that he couldn't persuade her, James could only temporarily back down. He said in a low voice, "If you really want to do it, then be careful and make sure you don't overwork yourself. It's just, can you go back to how you used to be, and not be so distant from me?" She nodded lightly but gave no warm response. "I won't shirk the duties I'm supposed to fulfill. As for the rest, let nature take its course." This lukewarm reply left a heavy boulder pressing down on James's heart. He knew clearly that the phrase, "let nature take its course," meant she would never proactively hand over her true heart to him again. Early the next morning, she went to find Celia to ask about fabric suppliers and channels for selling ready-made clothes. After hearing her plans, Celia immediately and enthusiastically told her everything she knew, even volunteering to take her to the suburban market to contact suppliers. "Sarah, you should have planned for yourself a long time ago. Only with savings in your hands can you stand tall. If James gives you a hard time, just tell me. All the wives in the compound are on your side." Celia spoke to her while sorting the needle and thread in her hands, her tone full of support. She answered with a smile. Her mind was completely clear. Over the next few days, Sarah settled all the household chores every day, dedicating her free time to cutting fabric and sewing ready-made clothes. At night, when James returned to the base, only the quiet sound of sewing remained in the room. The days of her taking the initiative to strike up a conversation and ask about his well-being were gone forever. Every time James returned and pushed open the door, all he saw was her profile as she buried herself in her work. Hot food was prepared on the table, but there wasn't a single word of waiting or care. He took the initiative to speak several times, talking to her about trivial matters around the military base or the aftermath of the commendation banquet. She only gave brief answers, and never proactively extended the conversation. He even tried bringing back candy and fabric to please her. When he handed them to her, she politely thanked him, accepted them, and set them aside, never showing the kind of overjoyed excitement she used to. This day-after-day alienation, bit by bit, wore away James's past certainty. He began to subconsciously pay attention to her every move. Seeing her chatting and laughing with the other wives in the family compound, with a long-lost relaxed smile on her face, yet always remaining calm and restrained, only when facing him the sense of loss and anxiety in his heart grew day by day. On the other hand, Clara didn't just settle down. After returning home, she sent several letters in a row. Every word and sentence reminisced about their youth, her writing hinting at grievance and complaining that James had deliberately distanced himself from her because of Sarah. Every time James finished reading the letters, he would subconsciously look at Sarah, who was burying her head in her work, his heart full of irritation with nowhere to vent. He once thought he controlled everything in the house. Holding his salary and his status, he believed she would never leave him. But now, watching with his own eyes as she stepped back, step by step, building her own life and no longer treating him as her sole reliance, he felt a strong sense of crisis for the very first time. One evening at dinner, James put down his bowl and chopsticks. Looking at the needle and thread constantly shuttling in her hands, he finally couldn't help but speak. "Clara sent a few letters saying she won't come to the base to bother us anymore. Does that make you feel better?" The needle and thread in her hands never paused, nor did she look up. Her tone was light. "There's no need to specially tell me about her correspondence. As long as you know your boundaries, that's enough." There was no joy, no relief, as if Clara's staying or leaving had long had nothing to do with her. James's hand holding the bowl and chopsticks abruptly tightened. That powerless panic once again swept over him overwhelmingly. He finally truly realized that what he had lost wasn't just his wife's gentleness, but the Sarah whose heart and eyes were once filled only with him. Clara's letters came one after another. Between the lines, they seemed to be conceding, but in reality, every sentence hid a provocation. She knew James valued his pride the most, so she deliberately wrote in her letters that she was alone out there with no one to take care of her, blaming all her grievances on Sarah's pettiness. At first, James would put the letters away and read them alone. Later on, with every letter he opened, his look towards Sarah carried an extra degree of hesitation. He tried to chat with her about the contents of Clara's letters, looking for a breakthrough to ease their relationship. But she never took the bait. Every day, she followed her routine of managing the household and sewing clothes. In her free time, she followed Celia to the suburban market to deliver goods and collect fabric. Her days were fulfilling and stable, and she refused to spare half an ounce of energy for these romantic entanglements. In just 1 month, Sarah had saved up a small stack of loose change from sewing clothes. She carefully wrapped it in a coarse cloth handkerchief and tucked it into the hidden compartment of her wooden trunk. This savings, which belonged exclusively to her, was the confidence she had never possessed in her entire previous life. Celia often joked with her, noting that her brow was now relaxed and she no longer had that cautious, suppressed look from before. "Sarah, you're finally living clearly now. With money in your hand, there's no panic in your heart. You never have to live looking at a man's face again," Celia said, sitting beside her and threading a needle. Celia kept her voice very low. "A few days ago, I went to the market in town and ran into Clara. She didn't go back to her hometown at all. She rented a small room right in town and keeps looking over toward the military base every few days. It's obvious she hasn't given up. The hand in which Sarah held the fabric shears paused for a moment before returning to normal. She replied faintly, "She has her own plans. I can't control her. It's enough for me to just mind my own life." Just as she finished speaking, James's steady footsteps echoed in the hallway. Celia tactfully packed up her sewing, stood up, and took her leave. On her way out, she deliberately shot Sarah a comforting look. The door was pushed open, and James walked in. He clutched a newly delivered letter in his hand, and his expression was far from pleasant. He spread the letter out on the wooden table and pushed it in front of her. "Take a look. Clara rented a place in town. She said she just wanted to be a little closer, and that she won't disturb our lives anymore from now on." Sarah lowered her eyelashes and glanced at the frail, pretentious words on the paper. She didn't even have the slightest thought of reaching out to touch it. Slowly withdrawing her gaze, she lowered her head to organize the cut fabric at hand. "This is a correspondence between the two of you. There is no need to show it to me. I have no intention of interfering." Seeing her remain detached and distant, James could no longer suppress the anxiety that had been building up for days. His tone carried a hint of imperceptible exhaustion. "Sarah, I have already tried my best to distance myself from her and consider your feelings at every turn. Can't you just let go of the grudge in your heart and live a good life with me? I have never neglected our life. I haven't slacked off in the slightest when it comes to the 3 meals a day, the clothes, and the bedding at home." Sarah stopped the work in her hands, raised her eyes, and looked directly at him. Her logic was clear, without a trace of emotion. "But living a life together does not equal blind compromise and endurance. You asked me to accommodate her pressing closer step by step, yet you never asked me if I was willing to endure the gossip and pointed fingers of others. A military marriage requires mutual understanding and consideration. This consideration should never fall solely on me." James was left speechless by her words. He knew in his heart that rumors had already been swirling in the military family compound. Many people were privately discussing how he favored his childhood sweetheart and wronged his own wife. Even the family members of several leaders had indirectly reminded him to mind his boundaries. Unwilling to face these rumors head-on, he subconsciously wanted her to back down and smooth over the entire storm. "There's no need to take other people's gossip to heart. As long as our marriage is harmonious, what others say doesn't matter," he said. "The foundation of a harmonious marriage is clear boundaries." Her tone was calm, yet her attitude was resolute. "She knows perfectly well that you have a family, yet she deliberately stays nearby to entangle herself with you. That is her losing her sense of boundaries. You know perfectly well that it puts me in an awkward position, yet you indulge her approaches time and time again. That is you losing your bottom line. With these two things combined, no amount of accommodation can uphold a stable life." While they were at a stalemate, a knock suddenly sounded at the door. Opening it, they saw Ryan. He looked troubled, holding a record of a situation reported by the local masses. "James, it's feedback from the police station in town. Clara has been loitering at the military base gates multiple times, stopping soldiers who are going out to ask about your whereabouts. Quite a few people have already raised objections. The regiment's political commissar asked me to come over and give you a heads up. You need to handle this matter properly to avoid affecting the regiment's atmosphere." Ryan spoke fairly, without favoring anyone, merely stating the objective facts. After hearing this, the color instantly drained from James's face. He had always thought that Clara was just living quietly in town. He had never expected she would make such an out-of-line move, completely crossing the red line of military base management. After Ryan left, the room fell into a dead silence. James gripped the feedback record, his fingertips turning white. Only at this moment did he fully see through the calculations hidden beneath Clara's disguise of frailty. She claimed she wouldn't intrude, but in reality, she was pressing closer, step by step. She didn't even hesitate to jeopardize his career just to force her way into their lives. He turned to look at Sarah, who remained calm and indifferent from beginning to end, as a strong surge of intense remorse welled up in his heart. The panic, when their eyes met at the commendation banquet, the anxiety brought on by her growing alienation over the past few days, all of it now crystallized into bone-deep regret. In the past, he always felt she was meek and sensible, believing that no matter what he did, she would always stay right where she was and wait for him. Because of that, he had unscrupulously indulged his old friend, completely ignoring Sarah's grievances. It wasn't until Clara's schemes were completely exposed, nearly destroying the future he had fought so hard for over the years, that he finally understood. The wife who had silently accommodated all his faults had already had her heart completely broken by him. James softened all his tough postures and walked up to her, his voice carrying a rare trace of humility. "Sarah, it's my fault for misjudging people, and it is I who owe you. I will go to town today to make things clear to her." I'll tell her to leave immediately, and we will never interact again. Can you give me one more chance to make it up to you? Sarah quietly looked at the genuine regret in his eyes, feeling not the slightest ripple in her heart. In her past life, he had repented like this too, but after repenting, he still repeated the exact same mistakes. A belated awakening could never make up for the grievances she had already suffered. You don't have to do anything for me. Handling it this way is simply what you ought to do to abide by military base rules and fulfill your marital duties. It doesn't count as making up for anything. She took out the coarse cloth handkerchief containing her spare change and placed it on the table. During this time, I've sewn clothes and saved up a little bit of money, enough for me to live on my own. I have already submitted a request to the regimental headquarters to deregister myself as an accompanying military spouse. From now on, I plan to go back to the city and make a living by making ready-made clothes. James's pupils contracted sharply. He stumbled, taking a half step back, and looked at her in disbelief. You're leaving? We've been married for 3 years. Do you really want to separate just like this? The premise of staying together is mutual cherishing. A one-sided persistence is meaningless. Her tone was calm, yet every word was spoken with absolute certainty. I hold no resentment. I just don't want to trap myself in this unbalanced relationship and consume myself anymore. You have a bright future ahead of you, and shouldn't be tied down by family matters. I, too, want to find a peace and stability that belongs only to me. He reached out, wanting to grab her wrist. Sarah gently turned sideways to avoid it. There was no trace of panic dodging. It was just a polite distancing. This subtle movement completely shattered his last shred of hope. Early the next morning, James made a special trip to town, completely cutting off all contact with Clara and ordering her to leave the local area immediately. The fragile mask Clara had painstakingly maintained was torn off on the spot. She cried, made a scene, and pestered him, only to be met with James's firm and tough refusal. She had no choice but to leave unwillingly, no longer having the face to appear anywhere near the military base. Clara's farce completely came to an end, and the rumors in the family compound gradually died down. Everyone knew that James had finally recognized right from wrong, but Sarah's resolve to leave never wavered. James cast aside all his pride. He came home early every day, actively shared the household chores, and bought various fabrics and pastries to please her. He repeatedly expressed his regret, hoping she would stay. But her mind was made up, and she proceeded methodically. She packed her luggage and said her goodbyes one by one to Celia and the other familiar military wives. On the day of her departure from the base, James stood by the main gates. Dressed in his military uniform, he no longer possessed the high-spirited vigor he had displayed on the day of the commendation banquet. His eyes were filled with utter desolation as he watched her board the shuttle bus heading to the city, reluctant to shift his gaze away for a long time. In the end, he had completely and irrevocably lost the wife whose heart and eyes were once entirely filled with him, the wife who had been willing to endure every grievance for his sake.
What a powerful ending! Sarah proved that without clear boundaries, people will just walk all over you. Ultimately, independence gives you the freedom to walk away. What did you think of her choice?